So we've just had International Men's Day, and for once I am allowed to say that yes, it does apply to all men. But one of the issues that always comes up is the suicide rate. And unfortunately, as I've complained about before, the response always seems to be ring this helpline, phone a friend, have a biscuit, it's all right to feel sad, this kind of thing. And although it's totally well intentioned, I don't believe that this is really getting to the root of what's driving the problem. So I want to talk about something quite specific. 400 suicides in England each year, that's about 8%, are directly linked to problematic gambling. And it's actually on the rise, partly because during lockdown a lot of sporting events stopped happening, and so there were less opportunities for gambling. But at the moment, between April and September this year, the NHS says it's seen a 42% increase in demand for their gambling clinics. They've described gambling firms as using predatory tactics. 3/4 of patients are men and the majority are in their 30s. So this is exactly the kind of thing that we want to be targeting. The government has actually done something. Starting last month, they made it the law that gambling firms cannot use celebrities to target under 18s. And unfortunately, that opens a kind of can of worms of like, what celebrity do you count as targeting the under 18s? And the general read seems to be you can't use current football players, but you can use previous football players and managers and other people related, pundits and things like that. So immediately the gambling firms have gone running to sort of relatively recently retired footballers. So Peter Crouch is now doing Paddy Power. We've got Harry Redknapp doing Bet Victor. We've got Robbie Keane doing Betway. So they're really like sticking to the law by the skin of their teeth, like the narrowest margin they possibly can. And on top of that, they're then kind of whitewashing the horrors of what they're doing. So they've got somebody like Peter Crouch at Paddy Power has released an album in which he conducts a choir singing like classic England songs, which of course are publicly in the public domain, so they don't have to pay for the rights for. And they're selling that album, the profits going to Stonewall. So it's like, oh, look at us, we're the good guys. But what is actually happening is far from it. So gambling companies actively target people online. Of course they do. Like that's what advertisers do online. So if you don't have a problem with gambling, the chances of you seeing an online advert for a gambling company on any given day are about 5%. But if you do have a problem, then the chances of you seeing an advert are about 38%. Even if you type the words, I have a gambling problem and I need help, into Google, the first thing that will pop up are adverts for gambling companies because they just find the keyword and that's what they go after. And they know that these people are the most likely to spend a ton of money gambling. And we know what's going on, right? As I said, we've got about 400 gambling related suicides every year. There are 55,000 children in the UK who are addicted to gambling. They spend 1.5 billion a year advertising gambling to us. And 80% of online betting comes from just 5% of customers. So there's this huge divide between people who occasionally put a bet on an England match or the Grand National or whatever, and this 5% of people who are spending 86% of the money that these companies are getting in. There's 1.4 million adults in the UK who are addicted to gambling. And we also know that certain types of gambling are much more addictive. So one that you might not be surprised to hear is addictive is like online slot machine casino type games. 45% of people who play those have problematic relationships to gambling. And then there is what they call in-play micro-betting, and it's quite misleadingly named because it sounds from the word micro-betting as though you might be betting very small amounts of money, but that's not what they mean. They mean micro-events, so betting on the next corner, betting on the next free kick, the next whistle to be blown, the next ball to be played, betting on these like in-game events. 78% of people who bet on those, and they can bet quite large amounts of money in some cases, 78% of people who bet on those have a problem with gambling and have a gambling addiction. So those are the kind of things that they're absolutely actively targeting. And you see so many adverts for those, don't you, when you do put the telly on, like you can bet on the next ball, you can bet on the next thing. And that's hugely problematic, not only because it encourages gambling addiction and it targets people who might be prone to that, but also because fixing sporting events is really difficult to do, right? You have to get all 11 players plus substitutes, and you have to get them all to agree how they're going to throw the match or what they're going to do in order to do that. But it's much, much, much easier for organised criminals to target an individual player and say, in minute 48, you know, the next free kick that you get, you need to miss it. Like, that's much, much, much easier to do. And so there's much more evidence that that kind of betting encourages criminal gangs to get involved and encourages fixing and encourages all the things that we don't want to see in sport. Now, there was a paper earlier this year. It didn't go nearly far enough. There's loads more that we could be doing. Here's one thing we could do. We could ban gambling advertising straight up. And that might sound totally outrageous, but they've done it in Italy, they've done it in Belgium. It's a thing we could do. We could just step up and do it. Or we could do, radical suggestion, you know, I've always got one of those. We could do what they've done in Finland and nationalise the gambling industry so that profits that do come in come directly into us, and we can then spend that money supporting services to help people who have a problem with gambling and supporting other services in our community. And it also then puts the weight on us as a society not to advertise gambling or offer gambling in ways that make people's life a screaming misery. Why isn't this happening? Well, I mean, the answer's blindingly obvious, isn't it? It's because the government has far too closer links to the gambling industry. And incidentally, it's not just me saying that, not just me, but also, you know, the person I always agree with on the subject, Ian Duncan Smith. Yeah, Ian Duncan Smith signed a letter in July this year to MPs to Downing Street saying that they thought that him and other MPs thought that the government had too closer links to the gambling industry and that Downing Street was too tied into that industry. So it's not even just me. Like, if Ian Duncan Smith thinks that you are too corrupt, believe me, you are too corrupt. Like, you are so far down that line. There should be a clever analogy there about it's like somebody who's very into something saying you're too into something. Fill your own joke in. I can't be bothered. I've got too much to say. Here's how close the government is to the gambling industry. Andrew Griffiths was Boris Johnson's parliamentary private secretary. He's now the Tory MP for Arundel and South Downs. Before that, he was chief financial officer to Sky. During his time there, they sold a 20% stake in their gambling arm Sky Bet to the Stars Group, which is now part of the Flutter Group, which owns Paddy Power. He's got 6.7 million worth of shares that he was given when he worked there. And because of the way that they try to make sure that people don't make a fast profit when they are in senior management in these companies, he basically has to hold these shares so that he has to continue to have an interest in the company doing well. So he is literally sat in Parliament potentially voting for policies that could slash his own personal wealth if they went through, but could also save 400 suicides a year. I'll give you one more example that I think is perhaps the most frightening. Jonathan Gullis, the Tory MP for Stoke-on-Trent, he read in Parliament directly from a briefing that had been handed out by Bet365. And I mean, that's amazing that literally a gambling company could write a briefing and then they read it in Parliament as though it's a sensible part of the discussion, as if it's not the most ridiculous, biased thing. At the same time, he forgot to mention that he had been given £540 worth of tickets to see Stoke playing football. And I don't want to malign lower league football, but I'm sorry, I don't even understand how it could cost £540 to go and see Stoke playing football. Like, I mean, did they sit him on a golden cushion and fetch him blinis every 15 minutes? It doesn't make any sense at all. £450 is a ridiculous overpayment for tickets to go and see Stoke playing football. However, importantly, £540 is a ridiculous underpayment to have your briefing read out in the House of Commons during a debate on the exact subject that matters to you. Like, it must cost more than that to even get a PR company to write you a briefing. Like, even the cost of postage and sending it round to all the MPs is starting to get towards that kind of level. The idea that that is enough money, like, we should just get together and see if we can buy, what do they want, you know, tickets to whatever local football team plays in their area and some sandwiches to go with it. Surely, if that's the price, if a couple of Stoke tickets is enough to have your briefing read out in Parliament, please, all MPs, call me now. I will personally buy you tickets to Stoke football matches if you'll read out the things that I want you to read in Parliament. They will be mildly embarrassing and entirely socialist. It's a huge issue. In the period leading up to the review of the gambling industry, 38 MPs, two-thirds of them Tories, enjoyed £280,000 worth of salaries, hospitalities and speaker fees from the gambling industry. They are not in a position to make the right decisions. We're going to have to pile the pressure on them. I think there's loads that we can do, and I think there's loads of good steps that we could take to make this situation better. And the first thing that we need is another gambling review, and it needs to be done without people helping themselves to backhanders on the way through, so that we can actually try to challenge this, because people's lives are quite genuinely at stake. And on the subject of people spending money recklessly, please may I encourage you, if you possibly can, to sponsor my videos, because we can't make this content without your support, and I think we're doing something quite important influencing the debate around these subjects, and I really appreciate your help. See you next week.